Hi everyone, this is Zara here, and I'm joined by Ragnar, and we're two of the three co-founders of EdVenture. We're joined this week by Jamie Mcfarlane, the founder and CEO of Creator Fund, who has very kindly agreed to talk to us about the university startup ecosystem, VCs, and what lies in between. Thank you very much for joining us on this episode, Jamie.
Pleasure, very nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
So to start us off, can you tell us a bit more about Creator Fund? So what drove you to found it and how it's grown and evolved since then?
Yeah, of course. So Creator Fund is a venture capital firm investing in the best student and academic startups across Europe. So we have teams across 25 universities, very much including Edinburgh, where we've done some great deals. And our teams are made up of students themselves, so largely PhDs on the ground, in classrooms, in laboratories. And the thesis is that they are best positioned to find out what's happening on campus. So if you want to know, who's working on a really interesting life science startup at Edinburgh, you need someone in the laboratory, in the classroom, to be able to find that startup. And so that's our secret sauce. We train brilliant student investment partners to find those deals for us. And then we've built a fund that is designed to give university-based founders the support they need. So access to talent across our university network, strategic support, and then also substantial support with follow-on fundraising as well. And it's all based off a model that I was part of when I was doing my MBA over at Stanford, and saw in America how the list of startups that began life in university campuses is legendary. Facebook, Snapchat, DoorDash, Dell, and trying to bring that same university-focused innovation to the UK.
Thank you. Well, it's really interesting you mentioned that. So obviously Creator Fund, like EdVenture, is a very big advocate for student entrepreneurship. And you recognize that immense potential there. And you sort of touched upon some of these world-leading tech companies that were founded on campus in the US. So I guess my question to you, Jamie, is having studied at both Oxford and then also Stanford Business School, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the differences between the ecosystems in the UK and the US on campus. So, for example, why do you think Dorm Room Fund, as you mentioned, was established back in 2012, and we're only now starting to see similar organizations popping up here in the UK?
Well, we're working very hard to catch up. So Creator Fund has been around for a year and a half, and we're trying to catch up for lost time. But I think, I think the difference is, so we don't see the same level of undergraduate focused student entrepreneurship in the UK. So in America, a lot of the student entrepreneurs that people look up to, the kind of Mark Zuckerbergs, the Evan Spiegels, a fair number were undergraduates. Here, from our experience of what we see, it's much more PhD focused, technical masters focused. And so, using deep domain expertise that you get by virtue of studying material science at Cambridge or robotics at Edinburgh, and then building a startup in those fields. I've got a few thoughts on why. I think that the undergraduate system in the UK tends to be very focused on single discipline academia. By that, I mean, I read history. I'm very, very good on the Battle of Hastings, but that's about all I learned for 3 years of my undergraduate in Oxford, maybe with some later Middle Ages thrown in. But in America, the kind of multidisciplinary approach is you might take a computer science class and then a history class and then a chemistry class, and you're being exposed to lots of different types of ideas, but also meeting potential co-founders across those different programs. I think another difference is, at least in England, I know it's different in Scotland, you've got 3-year degrees rather than 4-year degrees. And then lastly, I think it's just there isn't that much capital and support focused on undergraduate founders, which is why, Creator Fund movement and that type of institution, I think, is additive to the ecosystem. And hopefully over the long term, despite us also being focused on PhDs, that's also going to broaden the profile of students starting companies in this country.
Absolutely, and that's really interesting. Just going back to the point about the differences in the education system, with UK undergraduates being very focused on one particular degree, and perhaps the US undergraduates having a more holistic approach. Do you think that's a problem in the UK, and do you think we would benefit from seeing a change to that, from people being able to take courses in, if you're studying a tech subject, maybe taking a humanities course, and seeing a bit more of a crossover there?
Yes, I do. I think the UK needs to rethink its university philosophy when it comes to the classes being taught. I mean, I think that it is born from a system that might have served us in the Victorian era or beforehand, where the emphasis was very much on learnedness and deep understanding of the classics and slightly more esoteric subjects. And I think there is, of course, value in that, but that needs to be updated for the year 2021. And what you teach the brightest minds in the country matters. So if we say to the brightest 18-year-olds across this country, we will really encourage you to go and get a university degree in X, that X is going to have a massive impact in the jobs they go on to do and the startups they go and found and the organizations they want to be a part of. And I think we put too much emphasis on subjects that are divorced from what the modern workforce today and modern business needs and wants. And it's a tough thing to change, right? It's very easy for us all to sit on a podcast and say this and sound wise, whatever, right? But it's deeply entrenched, and it's also in some ways dislodging some of the most brilliant academic centers in the world, right? The people have been learning classics at Oxford since 12th century, and so it's not easy to change, and it doesn't need to be changed in its entirety, right? You still need people studying these subjects, but the fact that there's such an emphasis on it, and the fact that the best minds are all channeled towards that direction is detrimental. And then the other thing that I would stress as well is I also think it fuels education inequality, because I think that you can go to a certain type of school, be trained a certain way, prepared to go and do the entrance exam for the university with the right kind of answers, and that funnel is not equal opportunity for people that don't have that training. And I think that a broader philosophy on what we're teaching and what we value would be a step forward in addressing that.
Thank you, Jamie. And you touch upon your investment thesis with Creator Funds, and you kind of focus on PhD students and master students where you're actually leveraging the unique insight that they've gained through their education and through their research. And I was wondering, how do you overcome the risk of being more technology focused or technology first, as opposed to problem first, and this kind of problem solving lens that maybe people would have after some experience in the industry or applications, as opposed to students mainly doing research in the academic environment. Obviously, there's like a case in both sides. You have, technology like CRISPR who have immense applications, but then again, also sometimes the risk of not having enough applications for certain technologies and being more technology first. So it'd be interesting how would you overcome that risk when investing or assessing potential investments?
That's a really good question. So, I mean, the kind of center of the Venn diagram for Creator Fund is a company where technology is core to why it's defensible. There's been some sort of innovation from a technological standpoint that gives this business its uniqueness and why it's going to be able to outcompete the existing incumbents. But at the same time, a highly driven and commercial founder, right? We're looking for people that sit at that intersection. And in our view, taking an archetype, a 30-year-old, let's call him or her founder, who's doing or done a PhD, developed deep domain expertise by virtue of going to a great university like Edinburgh and studying something technical, but now come up with their idea and believe in what they're going to want to build and are forsaking an academic career that looks safer and often is being held out to them as something that they should aspire to within the university, but is instead going and starting a company. We think that's a really compelling profile of founder. And we think that a lot of university investing in the UK misses that founder because there's so much focus on spin-outs. And by spin-outs, I mean a kind of academic, the university owns 30 to 50% of the IP, There's so much emphasis on that, which I think often the founders are less commercial, right? Typically, if you've been in academia for 20 years and maybe you're devoting 25% of your time to starting a company, you don't really want to start that company, or you're kind of doing it 1 foot in the water, 1 foot out. We think that profile, why we're so focused on masters and PhDs is that we think we get that profile of technical plus commercial. But we look very broadly as well. And I mean, I know we'll be talking a little bit later about some of our Scottish deals, but we've backed a brilliant 21-year-old undergraduate out of Heriot-Watt who has that technical commercial background at 21 years old and straight out of his undergrad. So that doesn't have to be the rule, but it's why we broadly focus in that area.
Well, that's really interesting. And actually going back to the startup you mentioned, so whilst we since expanded, EdVenture was founded initially in Scotland and ran its pilot cohort with the University of Edinburgh students in 2020. And Scotland has a very diverse scene of both student and social entrepreneurship. And I know your team now it spans 25 universities across the UK. But I'd love to hear more about your involvement in the Scottish ecosystem. So what your experience there has been, and particularly with Suji and Touch Lab, which I'm really excited about.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a good day to be asking this, because if you are in Scotland today, go and pick up a copy of the Scotsman or the Herald or the Scottish Times, because Suji is in all of them. I got woken up by the founder, Alex, who is brilliant. Calling me to tell me it's on, in all the newspapers in Scotland, because he's just announced his new partnership with the LTA, who are going to be using Suji on their tennis players, and Jamie Murray has invested. So obviously, British tennis champion has invested as well. So it's an exciting day to be talking about it. We're really bullish on Scottish university startups. I mean, I'm slightly biased. My family is from Aberdeen originally. I'm very proud to be Scottish British. We think it's really exciting. I think a few things. Firstly, you've got excellent universities, right? You've got world-class institutions that have a real emphasis on entrepreneurship, right? We work very closely with the team at Edinburgh Innovations, the student enterprise team at Edinburgh, the team in the tech transfer office. Edinburgh in particular has a really good infrastructure there to support founders. See the same at Strathclyde, Heriot-Watt. So it's that kind of intersection of great universities and then really great support for founders as well. We think Scotland's often overlooked. So much capital goes to London, Oxford, and Cambridge. I mean, 71 pence of every pound of venture funding in the UK goes to London. That's massive, and should be addressed. And so there's just so much less capital going to these startups in Scotland. And we just think that the quality is just as high. So as investors, we find great deals, great founders that we want to work with, and the opportunity to get involved. And so that's been really exciting for us. I also think what Scotland's got really good at is technical focus. I mean, one of the things we think a lot about at Creator Fund is, if you look at America, they've got a lot of regional specialization. So, you go to Texas, that's where you see oil and gas. You go to Los Angeles, that's where you see entertainment. You go to DC, maybe GovTech. Aspen and Denver have got very good in some of the food tech space. I think it's a really strong model for how to encourage entrepreneurship, and we need to do more of that in the UK. And Scotland's actually very good at that, right? So you've got at Edinburgh, world-class startups in robotics, really strong life science, strong computer science. You go up to Aberdeen, you've got some really interesting stuff happening in renewables. You go to Abertay and Dundee, and you've got, one of the world's, really good gaming clusters. And so we really like that. And then obviously what I didn't talk about, but you've got it across the west coast of Scotland, ag tech and food tech startups. So yeah, we'd love to talk more about the two deals in particular, but I've got a team across Aberdeen, Edinburgh, Glasgow, heavily involved, St Andrews, heavily involved in Dundee, heavily involved in Strathclyde as well, Heriot-Watt too. And so we're very committed to what's happening in Scotland.
And it would be also interesting to know is how the deal flow works for a creative fund. So I believe that you currently have ambassadors at different universities that kind of have a network in their respective universities and source different startups. But are there also other ways that you source startups, or what is the main approach that you have at Creative Fund?
We typically see startups in three ways. So we have student investment partners who are the senior members of our team, and student analysts across universities who are responsible for finding deals on the ground. We work very closely with the university itself. So, for example, I have a really good relationship with the team at Edinburgh, and we'll share deals back and forth. And then through affiliated programs and competitions. So look to the good work you guys are doing at EdVenture, and look at competitions like that across the UK and other partners, or kind of organizations in the space like Innovate UK. In Scotland, you've got Converge and Scottish Edge, and so those type of partners and working with them. But I mean, I can give you an example of so we did a deal that closed on Christmas Eve. It was touch and go whether it would take over Christmas, and actually it was during the same time as the Brexit deal. So we were kind of internally wondering what was going to get closed first, the Brexit deal or Touch Lab, which is the deal we did in Edinburgh. And it's a fantastic deal. I mean, this is really UK innovation at its finest. It's a PhD out of the University of Edinburgh. He's a PhD in sensing, and he's developed electronic skin for robots. So giving machines the ability to touch and feel like human beings. And so if you are in a warehouse and you're a robot, it would allow you to decipher the difference between an apple and a banana and an orange. If you're a robotic doctor, it would let you take pulse or temperature. And also really interesting use cases in things like space, where you need to be able to sense atmospheric conditions, nuclear decontamination with similar thinking, and obviously gaming and being able to immerse yourself in virtual worlds. So incredible founder. And we've been following his progress for about a year. Knew he was working on something really interesting, knew he wanted to be part of the journey. And it's just really hard to, build the relationship or get in touch or stuff like that. I live in London, he's based in Edinburgh, and you send emails and stay in touch. But the person that really made that deal happen was our student investment partner in Edinburgh, a guy called Ian Mackey. He's a PhD in computer science, and he also knew the founder, went with long walks with the founders, talked to him. It was in December, so it was during COVID as well, so you couldn't go to cafes or restaurants. And the pool guys were like walking around the meadows in the freezing cold. And he'd try and text me afterwards, but couldn't because his hands were so freezing. But that's how we, got that deal over the line and built the relationship of trust that you need between fund and founder, and it's so important. And we can only do that across 25 universities because we've got people like Ian on the ground doing such a great job. Our senior members of the team are all incentivized through carried interest, so that they, when Touch Lab is a success, Ian will benefit from that as well. He actually wrote his own angel check as well. He believes so strongly in the deal, but he would see benefit of that through the fund. And so that's very much how we do it. And that deal is indicative of how we go about finding founders that perhaps others can't access.
And prior to the investment, did Touch Lab already demonstrate some kind of traction? So with the applications of their new technology, or what were you looking at specifically?
Yeah, I mean, so fundamentally, and I'm sure if you do this podcast, people will tell you this a lot, and so it's not particularly groundbreaking, but fundamentally, right, at this stage of where we're investing, the founder is the most important factor. This founder is exceptional, and I think what I talk about, to narrow down that about as well, is like, I think you're looking for a founder that is a cross between Babe Ruth and Lewis Hamilton. So Babe Ruth is the American baseball star of the 20th century, and he would hit massive home runs and have the ability to see where the ball could go that nobody else could, and vision for hitting it out of the park in a way that just other people couldn't see, right? And so you need that vision of what the company can be like in 10 years time, and the self-belief to achieve that. But at the same time, the Lewis Hamilton part is, we're writing a, I don't know, £150,000 check. It's all well and good if you've got a vision for what this company can look like in 10 years. You've got to be able to get to the next pit stop, right? The 10-year vision is entirely dependent on you turning our 150K check into a £1 million check in a year, into 5 million, into 10 million. And actually, we see a lot of student founders that are better at the Babe Ruth than the Lewis Hamilton, because the Lewis Hamilton is the ability to get those first 50 users, get those first 100 users, do the hard stuff, keep it afloat when COVID hits and everything goes wrong and right? So we want that intersection. This founder is that intersection. He's got the vision of what this company looks like when they're putting robots in space, but he's already sold into major UK retailer right now, and he's in the he's in the world's leading avatar competition. He's got a strong pipeline of people looking to use his product. We externally validated the technology today, and he's just got the short-term vision to be able to execute to where he needs to go. That's going to make the long-term vision a reality. So we're looking for that intersection, and it's very similar actually to Suji out of Heriot Watt, where the guy's 21 years old and had not raised minimal money before we met him. And he's sold into the Scottish rugby team and tennis players just by sheer grit and drive and pounding down doors. And we really like to see that. We understand that this is not the finished article, and the tech probably is it's going to evolve over the journey with us, and we're investing very early. But we want to see that somebody's got that drive and got something in their hands that has demonstrated some level of being special and unique, and some early connection with the market to demonstrate that there's pull from the other side.
I also one stuff that caught my eye when I had a look at your kind of portfolio was Recycle Eye, because in my eyes they're kind of focusing on a really big problem that the world faces, problems with recycling, waste, and things like that. And also there's a kind of a big need of staff in this kind of area for recycling, because it's kind of quite manual task so far, and then using new advances in machine learning, such as computer vision, to really separate the waste and optimize the recycling. And so it'd be interesting to know about how you got approached by Recycle Eye, or how your investment proceeded.
Yeah, it's been great, and you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right with the thesis there. And we've got a thesis more broadly on COVID has accelerated the need to take human beings out of manual processes and technology that can enable that. We found Recycle Eye through our Founders Factory relationship. So Founders Factory are one of our core partners. A great partner of mine has been Alex James, who's on the team at Founders Factory. He saw the deal and saw they were student founders and sent them to me, and we loved it. Victor and Peter are doing great, gearing up for a next fundraise soon. And yeah, I mean, the technology is amazing. So they've built the biggest, or one of the world's biggest libraries of trash, right? So with machine vision, you need to be able to train the algorithms on data, so that the data is just pictures of trash, right? And it's really complicated. You have a Diet Coke, have an iron brew, we're talking in Scotland, have an iron brew, and you crunch it up afterwards, right? And the way you crunch it up, or whether you put it in your bin and then something else discolors it, or different SKUs, it's all going to have a different implication for the machine vision, right? And can the machine vision recognize that is a can of iron brew, and it should either be incinerated or recycled or whatever else it is? So they've had to develop a massive library of images to be able to train this technology, and now it's being used in recycling plants by people like Veolia off the back of that. And here's a great story for grit and MVP, which is one of the things that impresses me about them. So their first product was a treadmill in Bournemouth, because obviously they couldn't afford a conveyor belt, they couldn't afford a machine vision, whatever. They got a treadmill, and they just threw trash onto the treadmill to prove that they could recognize or sort it at treadmill speed. And so, the kind of example of guys that before they, we went in a round of a large round, around £1 million, right? But before they had £1 million, it's just, what can you demonstrate to show hustle and progress and some early indications that you're onto something, and thinking outside the box, like the treadmills are, for me, is an indicative sign of the potential of the founders that you're dealing with.
Definitely. And I think Recycle is a really good example of using that innovation at universities to tackle some of society's biggest issues and the areas that we really need innovation. And one of the things we see most frequently is that, innovation is something we need in many different sectors, but sometimes it really needs to be accompanied by some policy changes. And I know prior to Creative Fund, you ran for Parliament in the last election as a Conservative candidate in Westminster North. So I just wanted to ask how your
half your viewers are now going to switch off because this depends on people.
Well, I'd love to hear your perspective on how that's linked to your work in the startup ecosystem and how you view that intersection between VC and politics.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's two things, right? So the policy is the second part, but then it's also like, your experiences inform how you think of as an investor or founder, right? So we've got a company in our portfolio called Refund Giant, and they do VAT refunds for tourists and business. And COVID hit, and then all the tourists left the UK, and they had a Y Combinator demo day, how to get their numbers up. And it's like, how do we reach these tourists, right? How do we get these tourists before they go back to their country? Got like a day left. Let's bombard them with Facebook or Google advertising, right? For anybody who's been a political candidate, especially in a seat that's a little hard to win, like the one I stood in, and you're kind of working day and night to get every vote you can, that you spend your life outside tube stops, in the street, handing out leaflets until you can't feel your hands anymore. So I grabbed the guys and said, look, the number one thing, let's get leaflets printed today. Let's all go and stand outside Selfridges, outside Harrods, outside wherever, and reach as many tourists in the street as possible and leaflet them, because that's the way you can most effectively reach someone at point of sale. And it's interesting that from an entrepreneur standpoint, from a founder standpoint, sometimes you kind of, you're kind of doing the bigger strategy stuff, or it's all digital ads and stuff like that, right? And I think that experience of, running for Parliament and building a team and every day meeting people, the biggest diversity of people, from morning till evening, and trying to make an argument and trying to get your point across. It's given me an interesting perspective on the kind of initial parts of being a founder and how you go out and meet your first customers and understand them and build a relationship with them. And that kind of that day was illustrated of that, kind of putting my my campaigning shoes back on and trying to convince people outside Selfridges. I think in terms of policy, I think one of the biggest areas of policy where I think about the intersection between politics and entrepreneurship is, right now one of the biggest challenges that we face as a country is, how do you level up, right? How do you address the regional inequality that in England, so much affluence is centered on London, and in Scotland, so much affluence is centered in Edinburgh, and across the central belt. But how do you address that? And my view is that university entrepreneurship is one of the most effective ways to do that, right? If you think about what institution is most, equally distributed in terms of quality across the United Kingdom, you'd be hard pressed to find one that's as equally distributed in terms of universities, right? We've got great universities from Aberdeen, right in the northeast, to Cardiff and Belfast, south of Cornwall, and so how do you use those as magnets for talent and innovation and capital, and make that a kind of catalyst for growth locally? Because there's few other institutions. If you think I really want to drive more job creation in Dundee University and Aberdeen are going to be central to how you do that. And so, I think the government needs to focus more on that. I think the UK government does a fairly good job, but there are other things it needs to do. And then how do you then unify that with the venture capital and entrepreneurship and those sectors of the economy to make sure that we're really using universities to drive a leveling up agenda?
And how do you see, like, how do you see your role as a politician with kind of policy in conjunction with your goals that you kind of pursue in entrepreneurship? So, for example, in the context of Recycle, obviously the technology is solving the problem of recycling, but there are also limitations where many products have this kind of separation disturbers, so they're kind of mixes of different materials, and they're difficult to separate as such, and can't be just solved by computer vision, and where the only way to achieve the goal would be to implement certain policy that kind of forbids packaging or materials that can't be really separated anymore, that can't be recycled. So I was wondering if you also see your role as in politics in conjunction with the goals you pursue in entrepreneurship, or if you look at them more separately.
Yeah, I mean, I think politics and entrepreneurship are two of the biggest levers we have as a society to affect change. I mean, to give an example, right? An issue I care a lot about is animal welfare. I'm a vegan. I've campaigned on animal welfare for my life, and think it's a major unaddressed issue. And so, what are two things that have had impact on animal welfare? Well, number one, legislation, right? The UK government has done things like it's in the process of banning live exports. You can't send live animals overseas, and banning farrowing crates, and legislating how much room a chicken has, or how much outside space other farm animals have to have, right? So that's legislation. But then what's the other major driver, right, of why people are rethinking or diversifying the food they put on the plate? Well, entrepreneurship, right? I mean, the biggest driver, I think, that's going to reduce our use of factory farms in the next 10, 20 years is cell-based meat coming out of companies like Memphis Meat in California, where you can grow a burger in a test tube rather than having to slaughter a cow. And to a lesser extent, because I think it's not quite as much of a solution as sometimes it's held up to, plant-based meat, where you reconstitute, plant ingredients that mimics meat, right? So you have to have both, because we live in a free market economy, right? And I support that. I'm a conservative. I think that people should broadly, within what's possible, be able to choose freely what they want. And so you need to be able to have alternatives, and the consumers will choose a plant or cell-based alternative because it's there and is as attractive and potentially cheaper, and they're motivated to choose that over factory farm meat. And then you need a regulatory system that supports that, right? You need to think about how to use subsidies, and you need to think about where does government need to stop the excesses of factory farming and things like that. And so they have to work together, right? And neither lever can work in isolation. And so I do think they're closely intertwined, and it is a way to affect change, to be aware of the role of both of those levers on the issues that you care about.
Absolutely. And I think we both, Creative Funds and EdVenture share that optimism for the future of, the intersection between innovation and politics working together to tackle these key issues, because you do have to have that synergy there. So on that optimistic note, I think that's a really good place to end on. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Jamie. Hopefully this episode leaves the listeners out there as optimistic and excited as we all are. And where can our listeners find you if they want to find out more about what you're doing at Creative Fund?
They can physically find me in a flat in Birmingham that I haven't left in about 4 months because of lockdown. So
let's go virtually.
You can find me walking around. Virtually, I'm on Twitter, Jamie Mcfarlane, and www.thecreativefund.com is where you can see everything that we're up to, and you can apply for funding if you're working on a student or academic startup yourself, or if you're interested next year when we recruit our next generation of student investment partners and student analysts. We'll be doing that in September. You can pop in an application so that we can meet, and if you're more interested in the kind of venture side of the table, we're working to back and train the next generation of UK students, both founders and for investing. So any of those.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jamie. It was a privilege to have you here on the EdVenture Brief with us today.
Thank you very much, guys. Pleasure to meet you.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe.